in the most difficult time of our lives. And I say to the American people, if you are feeling anxious, feeling depressed, if you are feeling overwhelmed, if you're feeling confused, if you are feeling angry, you are not alone. Many millions of Americans feel exactly the same way. This pandemic has had a devastating and horrific impact upon our country. Over 900,000 people have died from COVID, and tens of millions have been made ill. Many thousands of workers have lost their jobs simply because they went about doing their jobs. They had to go to work. They were critical workers, and many thousands died as a result. And in the midst of the pandemic, in an unprecedented way, millions of other workers have chosen to find new employment paths. They've given up their old jobs. But it's not just working people who have been impacted. It has been a terrible time for the young people of our country. The education of our younger generation, from childcare to graduate school, has been severely disrupted in a way that we have never seen in the modern history of this country. But again, it's not just for workers or the children, it is for elderly people. You have senior citizens in this country who have died at alarmingly high rates, but in addition to that, they have been isolated over the last several years because of fear of catching the virus, which means that they can't come in contact with their kids or their grandchildren. They can't get out of the house, and they are hurting as a result. In America today, it is no great secret, it's an issue we're trying to deal with, that mental illness is on the rise, as is drug addiction, alcoholism, and domestic violence. In other words, these are difficult and, in fact, unprecedented times within our lives. But what I want to point out this afternoon is that while the vast majority of people in our country are hurting emotionally, they're hurting economically, these are not difficult times for everybody. That's an important point to be made. In fact, I want to start off with, if I might, some really, really good news. If you are a billionaire in this country or a CEO of a large corporation, for those people, these times have not been bad. They, in fact, have been very, very good. In fact, if you are one of the very richest people in this country, this moment right now has never been better for you than any time in American history. Today, corporate profits are at an all-time high, and CEOs, heads of large corporations, have seen huge increases in their compensation packages. And let me just give you a few examples. Everybody in America is worried about the high price of gas. We drive around, and today gas prices are higher than they were yesterday. But while gas prices are soaring, shock of all shock, oil company profits are now higher than they have been in over 7 years. Gas prices are soaring, and guess what? Large oil companies are making huge profits. In fact, in the last quarter, ExxonMobil, Chevron, Shell, and BP made nearly $25 billion in profits in 1 quarter. Gas prices soaring, profits of the oil companies soaring as well. But that's not all. Everybody is worried about high food prices. Many senior citizens living on fixed incomes go to the grocery store and they get very upset about seeing increased prices in meat and vegetables and everything else. Well, turns out that the food industry is also enjoying huge increases in profits. In fact, Kroger, one of the largest grocery store chains in America, made a record-breaking profit of some $4 billion in 2021, while its stock price jumped 36% in the past year. Its CEO got a 296% pay raise over the past decade, and they have been able to spend $1.5 billion on stock buybacks and dividends to enrich their wealthy shareholders. Food prices soaring, and yet company after company in the food industry are making huge profits. For the people on top, the good news is that it is not just that corporate profits have never been better. That's good news. But even better for them is that CEO compensation has never been higher. You know, there was a time way back in the 1950s when I was growing up when CEOs did very, very well. They made 20 times more than their average worker. Well, if you are a CEO, the good news is those days are long gone when you only made 20 times more than your average workers. Today, as I am sure the CEOs of this country know, they are now making 350 times more than what the average worker in America makes. 350 times more. Talk about greed. And by the way, at a time when we pay the highest prices in the world for prescription drugs, the really, really good news is that the CEOs of the top 8 pharmaceutical companies in America made over $350 million in compensation in 2020. Got that? 8 CEOs of the drug companies who charge us the highest prices in the world for prescription drugs made $350 million collectively in compensation. And if that is not good enough news for the billionaire class, let me give you some even better news. Today, the billionaire class owns more income and wealth percentage-wise than at any time in American history. As a result of a massive transfer of wealth, we hear a lot of talk about transfer of wealth. Oh my God, we can't tax the rich and transfer wealth. Terrible, terrible. But there has been, over the last many decades, a huge transfer of wealth. The only problem is it's gone in the wrong direction from working families to the top 1%. And as a result of that, what we have now is that the top 1% owns more wealth than the bottom 92%. Top 1% owns more wealth than the bottom 92%. And rather amazingly, the 2 wealthiest people in America now own more wealth than the bottom 42%. 2 people own more wealth than the bottom 42%. In this country, we pride ourselves in being a country that believes in fairness, that believes in justice, justice for all. It is not fair, it is not just that 2 people now own more wealth than the bottom 42% of the American people. That's wealth, accumulated income. In terms of income, what we earn in a given year, since the Wall Street crash of 2008, the top 1% has earned 45% of all new income created in this country, okay? Got 100 people, guy on top earns 45% of all of that income. You know, Mr. President, every day, as you well know, members of the Senate and the House, they go to the floor to give congratulatory remarks to the Boy Scouts, congratulating them on their anniversary, to the kids who have done well, or the Girl Scouts, or the 4-H clubs, or sports teams. I guess we recently honored Tom Brady for his great football success. And that's what we do. Every day somebody's coming here congratulating somebody else, and that's fine. I do the same. In fact, we just congratulated some great Olympians from Vermont. But, Mr. President, maybe the time is approaching when we should offer a unanimous resolution congratulating the billionaire class for their enormous success in moving this country into the oligarchic form of society that they have long desired. Maybe we should do a UC on that issue. And by the way, Mr. President, here's another area of congratulations to the billionaire class. When we speak about oligarchy, we should all understand that we're not just talking about massive levels of income and wealth inequality. We're not just talking about the rich getting richer and the poor getting poorer. We should all understand that never before in American history have so few owned so much. And this issue, the issue of the incredible concentration of ownership in our country, is almost never talked about here in Congress or in the corporate media. And that has a lot to do with the corrupt political system that we operate under, where many members of Congress receive huge campaign contributions from these very same people. But here's an important point to make, and tomorrow, actually, I'll be doing a hearing on this as chairman of the Budget Committee. This is an issue we almost never discuss, and it is of enormous consequence. Today in America, just 3 Wall Street firms, BlackRock, Vanguard, and State Street. I suspect that many Americans have never even heard of these firms. BlackRock, Vanguard, and State Street. 3 firms manage over $21 trillion in assets. $21 trillion in assets. What does that mean? Well, for starters, it means that the amount of money these 3 firms control is more than the gross domestic product, the GDP of the United States of America, the largest economy in the world, and more than 5 times the GDP of Germany. These 3 firms, BlackRock, Vanguard, and State Street, are major shareholders in more than 96% of S&P 500 companies. In other words, what does that mean? It means that they have significant influence over many hundreds of companies that employ millions of American workers. Now, it used to be, way back when, there was a company, Company X, owned by somebody. Nice guy, not a nice guy, good employer, bad employer. There was a person or a group of people who owned a company. That is rapidly changing in the oligarchic world that we are living, where a handful of Wall Street companies have major control over hundreds and hundreds of companies. You know, after the Wall Street crash, Mr. President, of 2008, I recall a lot of discussion about the wealth and the power of the big banks, the giant banks, and whether or not they were too big to fail. Huge amount of discussion. Well, today, these 3 firms, 3 Wall Street firms, are the largest shareholders in some of the biggest banks in America: J.P. Morgan Chase, Wells Fargo, and Citibank. In other words, These banks are also owned by a handful of Wall Street firms. What about transportation? You know, we all get on planes, we go here and there. Well, these three major Wall Street firms, BlackRock, Vanguard, and State Street, they are among the top owners of the four major airlines, United, American, etc. Well, what about health care? What about health care? Who owns the health care industry? Well, together these three Wall Street firms own an average of 20% of the major drug companies. They also own many hundreds of nursing homes, hospitals, and emergency rooms. What about housing? Well, what we're seeing is a handful of Wall Street firms are now the major owners of rental housing in America at a time, by the way, when the cost of housing and rents are soaring in this country. And maybe, just maybe, if you haven't heard a whole lot about these issues, it might have something to do with the fact that a handful of Wall Street firms control half of the newspapers in America. And I think there is a reality which maybe says it all. And that is, during this terrible, terrible pandemic, when so many people have died and become ill and lost their jobs and missed school and suffered all of the isolation that this pandemic has brought about, 745 billionaires in America became more than $2 trillion richer. And that is, to my mind, the clearest example of the level of corporate greed that we are now experiencing. Desperate workers who live paycheck to paycheck are forced to go to work. They go to work in hospitals, they go to work in public transportation, they go to work in meatpacking plants, bus drivers, whatever they may be. And thousands of them have died on the job, while a handful of billionaires, 745, became more than $2 trillion richer. And when we talk about the growth of oligarchy in America, I talk about it, not a whole lot of other people here do, but when we talk about oligarchy in America, it is not just that the very rich are getting much richer. That's one thing. But the reality is that tens of millions of working class people, lower income people, in the wealthiest country on earth are suffering today under incredible economic hardship, desperately trying day to day to survive. 745 billionaires in the pandemic, $2 trillion increase in their wealth, tens of millions of Americans struggling hard just to survive. Today, nearly 40 million Americans live in poverty, and tonight, almost 600,000 people will be sleeping out on the streets or in homeless shelters. They have no apartments, no places in which to live. And here's an important fact to remember. In our country today, the average worker is making $42 a week less than he or she made 49 years ago. In other words, when you try to appreciate the anger that exists in this country, the discontent, it has a lot to do with the fact that the average American worker is worse off in terms of real inflation weekly income than was the case 49 years ago. And think about that. Think about how crazy that is. Think about all of the increase in technology and productivity that we have seen, where workers today are producing a lot more than they used to because of the new technology, and yet, because of a huge transfer of wealth and income, they are worse off than they were in 1973. Half of the people in our country today are living paycheck to paycheck, and tens of millions are an accident, a divorce, an illness, or a layoff away from economic devastation. In America today, we remain the only major country on earth not to guarantee health care as a right. And the result of that is we have a system in which over 80 million Americans are uninsured or underinsured, and tens of thousands die each and every year because they don't get to a doctor when they should. While many public schools throughout our country lack the resources to adequately educate our young people or pay their teachers the wages those teachers deserve, at the same time, we are the most heavily incarcerated nation on earth. We've got more people in jail than any other country. Meanwhile, 45 million Americans who did go to college, they saved up, they went to college, they are now drowning in $1.8 trillion in student debt. And I talk to those nurses and workers every day who say, Bernie, we've got to do something, because every month I'm paying hundreds and hundreds of dollars in student debt. And here is something else that we don't talk about. You know, we have a habit here, I'm afraid, in the Senate and the House, we talk about a lot, but often not the most important things in the country. And that is that I suspect that as part of human nature, every person in America and around the world would like to live long and happy and productive lives. It's pretty basic human nature. But in America today, the very richest people live, on average, 15 years longer than the poorest Americans. So when you talk about income and wealth inequality, it's not just like, oh, this guy has a nice house, and this person doesn't have a nice house, big car, no car. That's one thing. If you are poor in America, you are dying at a significantly younger age than if you are wealthy. Madam President, the polls seem to show that more and more Americans are giving up on democracy. They work long hours for low wages. They worry about their kids. They can't afford health care. They see their jobs going to other countries. And meanwhile, the people on top are doing better than any time in American history, and they wonder, hey, we elect these guys to the House, to the Senate, governors. What are they doing for us? Do they understand? Do they live in the real world? Do they understand what is going on in our lives? Or are they too busy going out raising campaign contributions from the rich and the powerful? I believe, Madam President, that the time is long overdue for the Congress to start addressing the needs of the American people. And I know it is a radical idea to suggest that maybe, just maybe, we should do what the American people want and not what wealthy campaign contributors want. When 83% of the American people want us to lower the cost of prescription drugs, you know what? Might be time for the Senate to do that. When 84% of the American people know there is something wrong with elderly people, can't afford dental care, hearing aids, or eyeglasses, 84%, maybe, just maybe, we may want to expand Medicare to cover those basic health care needs. When overwhelming numbers of the American people know that it is beyond absurd that some billionaires and large profitable corporations don't pay a nickel in federal income tax, maybe, just maybe, we might want to change our tax system so that the rich and the powerful start paying their fair share of taxes. when 76% of the American people understand that our home health care system is a disaster, that many elderly people and disabled people would rather stay home rather than be forced into a nursing home, maybe we should expand home health care. When we remain the only major country on earth not to have paid family and medical leave, the only major country on earth, maybe it's time that the Congress passed Paid Family and Medical Leave Act. When we have a dysfunctional child care system in which in my state, not different around the country, working parents are paying 25%, 30% of their income for child care so they can go to work, maybe we should reform our child care and pre-K system so that it is affordable to all parents in this country. And maybe, I know this is another radical idea, piece in the paper today about the impact of climate change. Sea level is going to rise by a foot in the next few decades. We're looking at drought, floods, extreme weather disturbances. Here's a really radical idea, Madam President. Maybe at a time when the scientists tell us that it is questionable in terms of the kind of planet we're going to leave our kids and future generations, whether or not it is going to be habitable or livable. I know it's a radical idea. A lot of fossil fuel money coming into this place. But maybe, just maybe, we stand up to the fossil fuel industry and tell them their short-term profits are not more important than the future of this planet. So, Madam President, we have a lot of work to do. I'm not sure that we will do it. I'm not sure that members of Congress have the willingness or the courage to stand up to the powerful special interests who control the economic and political life of this country. But this I will say, if we do not do that, in terms of the economy, in terms of climate, in terms of health care, in terms of education, future generations will look back at this Congress and say, where were you? Thank you, Madam President.